1 of ʿImrān. And alhamdulillah, these verses in ʿImrān are important because they speak about this important interaction with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the delegation of Ahl Najran. And this is essential because many times when we think about Arabia and we think about the Quraysh and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there's a stereotype that we have here in the U.S. that Arabia is this desolate and isolated place, that there isn't anything there, just tents and some camels. But in fact, Mecca and Medina was a place where different religions, people that were Jews and Christians, they interacted with. And you see this in sort of Quraysh, إِلَافِ قُرَيْشِ إِلَافِهِمْ رِحْلَةَ الشِّتَاءِ وَالصَّيْفِ. That they had the rihla, that they used to go from Yemen to Syria, and in that interaction, they would talk to Jews and Christians. So in this surah, ʿImrān, there is a delegation that come to the mosque of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Medina. And this is essential in that the mosque, right, is not just a Muslim space. Of course, it's primarily for Muslims that come and do it's a masjid, it's a place of sujood, it's a makan. But it's also a place of interaction with different types of people. We know that the women were there, the youth, and we had people of different faiths come and debate and discuss the different religious traditions. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this particular verse talks about how they had this debate about Christianity. And it's connected to the previous verse, where in verse 59, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ مَثَلَ إِيسَى عِنْدَ اللَّهِ كَمَثَلِ آدَمَ. So, one of the debates the Christians, when they came to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they asked him, who is Isa's father? And they were trying to get the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is the father. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the father, then Isa is what? The son of God. So this was part of their debate and tactic. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told the people, told the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, tell them that the example of Isa is like the example of Adam. خَلَقَهُ مِن تُرَابٍ ثُمَّ قَالَ لَهُ كُن فَيَكُونَ. That he was created from dust, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, kun, be, and it is. So it wasn't something miraculous in the sense that Isa alayhi salam is divine, but rather Isa alayhi salam is like Adam, that we're all human beings. We all come from the dust. We all have a womb that we are part of, and we are born into this earth. However, after a particular amount of time, they became to impasse. They were going back and forth, discussing, debating, and they couldn't come anywhere to an agreement. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed this verse. فَمَنْ حَاجَكَ فِيهِ مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا جَاءَكَ مِنَ الْعِلْمِ. So those people who continue to argue with you and debate and dispute, even after the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has given knowledge, فَقُلْ تَعَالَوْا نَدْعُ أَبْنَاءَنَا وَأَبْنَاءَكُمْ وَنِسَاءَنَا وَنِسَاءَكُمْ وَأَنفُسَنَا وَأَنفُسَكُمْ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave this order to do mubahala. And what is mubahala? So the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was told, if you've come now to a point and no one is moving in their argument and there's no debate, then tell them that ta'alu nadu, call your children. And tell them to call their children. And then tell yourselves to call your women. And then tell them to call their women and their wives. And yourselves and their selves, ثُمَّ نَبْتَهِلْ فَنَجْعَلْ لَعْنَةَ اللَّهِ عَلَى الْكَاذِبِينَ. And then نَبْتَهِلْ. And here in this verb, ibtahala, there is a debate and discussion in the ulama. What does this mean? The strongest, or one of the strongest opinion is that it's ijtihad fi du'a. So then all these people will come and they'll make a sincere prayer. They'll pray and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for what is right. Another says that they make a strong striving for whoever is wrong, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will punish them and a curse upon them. La'natullahi al kadhibin. So in the riwayat here, in the history of the seerah, that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he brought Hassan and Hussein with him. He brought Fatima and Ali. And they all came and they said, we were ready to do this. We were ready to call to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to see who was right. But the delegation of Ahl Najran, they decided they did not want to engage in this. And they said, rather we will go back and we'll take jizya. We don't want to fight with you, and we do not want to do this mubahala. And then this demonstrates the confidence of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Muslim community. إن هذا له الحق إن لهذا له القصص الحق. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says then that these are the stories of truth. Subhanallah. And in ʿImrān we see so many beautiful stories. The story of Maryam alayhi salam, the story when she was approached by Jibreel, the fact that she became pregnant with Isa alayhi salam. We see stories of Isa of curing people, of doing miracles, all bi'idhnillah, by the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying all of these stories that we've discussed here are true. وَمَا مِنْ إِلَهٍ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. Allahu Akbar. But there's only one God. Don't associate all these kiramat wa mu'jizat, all these miracles to human beings. They all come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when someone does this, it could be a anamat al-sidq, it could be a sign someone is true and righteous and a wali. But ultimately it is a sign that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala controls everything. وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ نَحْوَ الْعَزِيزُ الْحَكِيمُ. But very Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mighty and wise. فَإِن تَوَلَّوْا فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ عَلِيمٌ بِالْمُفْسِدِينَ. And if you turn around and you go away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He knows who is spreading fasad in this earth. So this, inshallah, will conclude with some thoughts here, but the verses go on where it says, قُلْ يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ تَعَالَوْا إِلَى كَلِمَةِ السَّوَاءِ. Subhanallah. That after this mubahala, and after they decided that they don't want to engage in this dua to see who is right, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls the Ahl Kitab. And He calls them to a common word. And this is, subhanAllah, a very beautiful phrase, kalimatin sawa. In that, even there is initiatives today of interfaith dialogue that occurred in Jordan and other places in the Muslim world, where they said, okay, we have differences, but we're going to find what is the common word. How do we be nice to our neighbor? How do we love each other for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How do we work towards the common good? And inshallah, the work, tomorrow to discuss that particular verse. So, to conclude, brothers and sisters in Islam, we see that these verses are very important because they deal with outreach and engagement. And this is one of the things that Adams, mashallah, does. But we have to critically analyze and ask the question, are we doing this in accordance to the Qur'an and Sunnah? Are we doing this to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said? And we see that in the Qur'an, there are critiques of other religions, that we do not believe in all the aqidah. Islam is a unique religion. Some people say Islam is just some type of heretical innovation, or Islam is just a sect of another religion. Islam is its own religion. It has its own arkan, it has its own pillars of fasting, of Ramadan, of Hajj, of Zakah. It stands on its own. But when we engage with other religious traditions, we should not be overly polemical, always criticizing and you're wrong. But at the same time, we shouldn't say, oh, there's no difference between us. We're all the same. This is also a lie. And that it's important for us to understand that when we engage with others, we have to engage in a principled engagement. That we're true to our own aqidah, our own theology, but at the same time we are respectful of other people. And we call them to respect and wisdom. And we call them to a mau'idah hasana, to calling in a righteous way. And we call them to kalimatin sawa, to a common good, a common word. And we see this beautifully done in the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, especially with Ja'far ibn Abi Talib when he was sent to Habasha. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam did the first hijrah. People talk about the hijrah of Mecca, Medina. This is beautiful. But there before that, hijrat al-ula, there was a pilgrimage where the Muslims went to a Christian nation. The Muslims were a minority. They went to this nation and they were living there. And then the kuffar, Quraysh, became upset, so they sent a delegation of Amr bin As, at the time who was a kafir, and they said, retrieve these rebels. So they went and they asked Najashi, the king, and they said, you have some youth, some young people, rebellious, They are speaking ill of our ancestors and our gods. Give them back to us. So Najashi became curious. So he called the Muslims. And he started debating with them and discussing. And said, tell us what your prophet recites. What does he read? So then Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, he recited Surah Maryam. And such a beautiful surah with a rhyming scheme, talking about the birth of Isa alayhi salam, how Maryam went through the struggle and difficulty. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave her respite and gave her a stream and dates that nourish her. So the Muslims were vindicated. But then Amr ibn As, he went to Najashi. And he said to them, they're telling you about Maryam and how Isa was born. Ask them more about Isa alayhi salam, because they don't believe he's the son of God. So then he called them back, and he said, what do you think about Isa? And at this point, the Muslims were scared, because they're a minority. They were also in a strange land. And they were afraid if they speak the truth about their aqidah, their theology, that they'll be expelled. But they came together and they said, no, we have to speak the truth. We can't just say we believe everything and we're all the same. They actually spoke up and said, we believe what our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us, that he's a bashar. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Ana bashar, mithlukum yuha ilay," that he's a man, he's a prophet, and that he was revealed. And Najashi, he came to them and he drew a line between them, and he said, the difference between you and us is between this line. Subhanallah, Allahu Akbar. And this is the importance of telling the truth. Sometimes you're in positions and you don't want to be open and honest and transparent about what you truly believe and what you truly need as a Muslim and a Muslim minority. But it's important that we really share with people our belief system, our theology, how we practice our deen. And you see, if we do that, people will actually come closer to you. They feel a sense of intimacy and trust and closeness. So, brothers and sisters in Islam, we see that we have to go between the polemics and the kumbaya, that everything is all the same. That we have to go between just criticizing other people. Of course, we have criticisms, but we also have to build a common good. And to conclude, we have to understand that as Muslims, we are not criticizing other religions as much as we're affirming Tawheed. That we may say to other people, and to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he told the Kuffar Quraysh, I don't worship these idols. But his hatred to the idols is not to hatred to people necessarily. Rather, it was him affirming Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allahu la ilaha illahu. That when we say a person cannot be divine, we're not criticizing them personally and hating their family or anything like that. Rather, we are talking about a theology. And we're talking about a theology, a deen of Tawheed, where we affirm Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ, that there is nothing like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He's distinct and He's unique. And because we believe in this concept of Tawheed, that's why we don't affirm idols. That's why we don't affirm the fact that people could be divine. That's the reason why we don't believe the angels are the daughters of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we always have to keep this in mind. That sometimes we go into these little minor debates, but what is the major theme that is bringing us together as believers? Is this idea that we wahid, that we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and make Him one. And that we only do sujood. We only do sajda to the divine, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not to any human being or any religious leader or to any man-made structure or any idol. Rather, our devotion and our love goes to the one who is unique and has no equal. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness. وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. Assalamu alaikum.